Thank you. Can everyone see my screen and hear me all right?
We have it up here on the projector.
How about now? Is it good?
That's even better. That's even better.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'll just start off. So the title of my talk is Japanese Influence in the Indian Freedom Struggle through during World War II. And this is an excursion into a retelling of history through postal history, right? So there's a little bit of history behind that. And the thing is that I started off being a topical collector, or as I learned today, somewhat of a thematic collector, if you will. And then I came across certain materials. I exhibited, I sort of broken down my theme into various periods of Indian history. I started exhibiting, and I coupled modern materials with a lot of classic or pre-stamp, or the early issues of Indian stamps and all of that. And I was categorically advised by the jury to sort of transition more into a postal history exhibit, because that is where my story kind of fits, right? Now, while doing that, I came across the trouble of incorporating the new materials that help me, or rather that I think would help me tell my story, right? So I'm just going to tell the story through postal history, and B, maybe touch upon a little bit on how my exhibit was taken by the jury. And right at the beginning, I'm a new collector. I have just been exhibiting for the past 3 or 4 years at max. Not 3 or 4 years, 2 years to be specific. So I have a lot to learn. So by no means I'm going to be this talk is going to be perceived as any advice. It's more of an experience rather than an advice. With that, I'm just going to go to the next slide. Okay. So the first question is, why did I select this topic? Other than, of course, it is very dear to my heart. Whenever we talk about Indian freedom struggle, right, the word Gandhi kind of pops up a lot. Yesterday, some of you have heard Raj Rajan give his talk on Gandhi. So there are already several well-known Gandhi collections, and they have been formed over a period of 2 or 3 decades, right? And there's no way for me as a new collector to go out there and contribute something new, right? That was one of the primary aspects as to why I chose such a theme. Secondly, post-independent India had very little to do with the revolutionary movement, right? And somehow down the line, when I read more about it, history did not add up. One of the primary sources that I really liked, I mean, this treatise by Shashi Tharoor, he's a member of parliament in India, and he had an Oxford Union speech on whether the British owe reparations to India, and he kind of turned that into a book. And as I was reading the book, I found this statement that, this was the approach brought to the movement for, that Gandhi brought to the movement for India's independence, and it worked. He was talking about the nonviolent movement per se. And he also writes, where sporadic terrorism and moderate constitutionalism had both proved ineffective, Gandhi took the issue of freedom to the masses as one of the simple right and wrong, and gave them a technique to which the British had no response. Okay, so I particularly had a problem with the word sporadic terrorism, because if you look back Indian history, you would find that this terrorist or revolutionary terrorist movements have had sort of a history, or maybe they were not tied in a string that kind of fits a narrative or a story, but it definitely, the terrorist movements were not sporadic. And I hope to sort of give you some insight as to why I don't think it is, sporadic. I mean, it's not me. There are other historians who believe that as of today, but this view kind of intrigued me, right? The third issue that I wanted to touch upon was that how is that independent India's very first philatelic item contained the words that never emphatically used by the Indian National Congress, right? And we will see what we're talking about, right? And lastly, if you there's this article in the Daily Pioneer, right, where it says that Netaji, not Congress, finally won freedom, right? I mean, I don't want to get political into it, but a little bit of background, right? So Clement Attlee was the British Prime Minister who effected India's independence, right? And in 1956, he came to Bengal, and the then Justice P.B. Chakraborty, he writes this, that my direct question to Attlee was that since Gandhi's Quit India movement had tapered off quite some time ago, and in 1947, no such new compelling situation had arisen that would necessitate a hasty British departure, why did they have to leave? Attlee cited several reasons, the principal among them being the erosion of loyalty to the British Crown among the Indian Army and Navy personnel as a result of Netaji's military activities. That's not all, Chakraborty adds. Toward the end of our discussion, I asked Attlee what was the extent of Gandhi's influence upon the British decision to quit India. Hearing this question, Attlee's lips became twisted in a sarcastic smile as he slowly chewed out the word minimal. Okay. So now I have a group of friends who use this minimal word as a troll to promote Netaji. Now, I'm not getting into the debate as to who did what. I personally feel both of them had different roles to play in the Indian independence movement. But these are some of the reasons what compelled me to take up this topic and develop an exhibit around it. Okay. Now, the background, right? So if I'm going to talk about Indian history, the Indian independence movement, I want to start off from the revolt of 1857, or the establishment of British rule in India, right? So Indian, the British actually came to India in the 1600s, right? And in 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, they literally crushed other foreign dominations, and then they became the supreme rulers who would establish business ties in India, right? Now, from 1757 through 1857, there were there's a lot of history around what the British did in India. And I think in 1857, the locals had it enough, right? And they rose in revolt against the British Empire, or I wouldn't say the British Empire, it's the East India Company at that point. And then after the revolt, I mean, the British term it as the mutiny. And I will, at this point, when I'm talking about material with, 1857 item, I would still call it mutiny and not Indian independence. And I will justify that later. After the mutiny, the British sort of realized that a lot of changes need to happen in the Indian subcontinent. And what they did was, after the mutiny, they brought India under the British Crown. And these obliterators were used by the Governor General. So India came under the rule of a Governor General, and these obliterators came to be used. And they were short-lived. They were only used in the winter months between 1861 and 1864. And these are, acclaimed rarities in Indian Marcophily, okay? And the reason I wanted to start off this exhibit with this item was because of the fact that, of course, this is a known rarity, and I was working on a topic which others had not, worked on before. So I really wanted to get the viewers or the jury's attention by starting off my exhibit with this. Now, moving forward, what was the genesis of the Indian freedom struggle, right? So it all started from 1857, right after the mutiny. I'm still calling it mutiny. From 1857 to 1877, there were several things happening around the empire, but in 1877, in the imperial Darbar, Queen Victoria was proclaimed as the Empress of India, right? And this is the Imperial Darbar Field Post Office. This is a letter sent from the Governor General's camp at the Imperial Darbar to Allahabad at the single Anna rate. And in that Imperial Darbar assembly, Ganesh Vasudev, this person, he stands up and he says that the that the Indian subjects under Her Majesty be treated in the same way as her British subjects. And that is some sort of in a way you can think of as genesis of the Indian freedom struggle that sort of spanned over the next 50 or 60 years or so. The other thing was the revolutionary movement, right? So how did the revolutionary movement all start? So as I mentioned earlier, in 1857, the major cause of the revolt was the fact that the British had little reverence to the local customs in India, right? So what happened was in 1895, when a bubonic plague broke out in Bombay, the plague commissioner, he had little reverence for the customs, so he would just go into the houses, he would burn all the clothes. There were women, who would not be, they wouldn't respect that. They would bring all the clothes, burn it on the street, and what have you, right? And in 19th century India, you would think that local customs and the caste system and everything was very predominant, a very predominant part of the Indian society. And for someone not to care about that, was sacrilegious, for lack of a better word. So what happened was that enraged these Chapekar brothers, right, to assassinate the plague commissioner of Bombay. And of course, they were eventually captured and hanged. And what happened was, after that, this spirit of revolutionary nationalism sort of came about, and various nationalist leaders, I'm going to talk about them in a few minutes, they started, to take revenge for the hanging of these Chapekar brothers, right? And to sort of show that, I use this cover, which was sent from India. It was disinfected in Malta to the Indian contingent in South Africa during the Anglo-Boer War. Now, the revolutionaries, right? So, as I mentioned, a lot of these revolutionary thinkers, and I'm categorically not speaking about Gandhi and the Indian National Congress, not as a sign of irreverence, but it is more to tell the story that I want to focus on than anything else. So please don't misinterpret my talk in any way. So during the early part of the 20th century, right, these revolutionaries, they became very active, right? And one of these figures, Mr. Rashbihari Basu, right? It's Rashbihari Bose. India brought out a stamp. They spelled it as BASU, but it's actually Rashbihari Bose, right? So he attempted to assassinate General Hardinge in 1912, right? And what happened was, he became underground. He went underground, and he sort of devised a lot of these different revolutionary activities in and around Bengal. Then it was a complex web of events that he eventually later planned, right? During that same time, early 1900s, between 1908 to 1912, that kind of period, Shyamji Krishna Verma, right? India brought out a stamp on Shyamji Krishna Verma. He founded this India House in the UK, right? And in this, in India House, right, several personalities like Vinayak Damodar Savarkar being one of them, he was the first person to actually attribute the revolt of 1857 or the mutiny, right, as India's first war of independence, right? And this is more of a, I would say in modern language, it's more of a marketing tool, I would say, and it was a genius idea as to sort of use the first war of independence, or sorry, as the mutiny as a model for the British troops who were, sorry, for the native Indian sepoys who were employed by the British and hence British troops to actually defy their own masters and fight for a greater cause, right? That's simple. So you have these barracks all around the British Empire with Indian soldiers. All that you have to do is somehow turn them against the British themselves, such that they can fight for India's independence, right? I think that is exactly what the motivation of V.D. Savarkar was. And this is basically the setting stage for all the later revolutionary activities. Now, during World War I, right, no one cared about prior to the revolutionaries, no one cared about India. They were a British colony and things like that. But thanks to these these revolutionaries, Indian oppression became a world event, right? And in this postcard, as you can see, I mean, this is a postcard that was sent through the Feldpost system, right? It says John Bull, le Protecteur der Primus, John Bull, der Freund und Besuchter der Kleinen, right? I mean, he's the oppressor of the oppressed, right? So over here, you can see Egypt, India, Transvaal, and all the other colonies, and you can see an Indian sepoy right under the boot of John Bull, right? So these sort of narratives started to fly around during World War I. And what happened was a lot of these revolutionaries, not only they mobilized propaganda, what they also did was they planned elaborate mutinies in and around the whole British Empire, right? All of them were crushed, right? And then some of these leaders like Raj Bihari Bose and others, like, of course, some of them were hanged as well. But a lot of these leaders, they sort of fled to various places, and Raj Bihari Bose fled to Japan. And we will come to that story in a bit. Now, moving forward, right, we talked about how the British Indian soldiers would defect against the British themselves, right? And we see the first instance of that happening during the siege of Kotal, Amara, where like, of course, it was a British Indian envoy that was there, and what they did was they were like the Turks literally defeated the British, right? And the Indian soldiers now became the British prisoners of war. And what eventually happened was those Indian soldiers were actually fighting for the Turks because they had the caliphate in their mind. They were Muslim, and religion had a big role to play. So instead of fighting for the British, they defected against the British for a greater cause, which is their religion in this case, right? And to sort of highlight that aspect, I use this British Indian King Edward VII postcard, which was hand stamped and sent from Turkish FPO to Germany, right? And it was sent to Albert Friedman, and it was sent by Damad Ismail Haki Beg, who was the Damad, or the son-in-law of the Turkish Empire during the time. And this is a very rare item. I mean, it's one of the 3 surviving extents that are out there. Now, fast forward to the World War II era, right? So how did it all start, right? So Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose resigned from the Indian National Congress. So Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, believe it or not, he was a very active Congress member, right? And he always regarded Mahatma Gandhi, although quite they viewed their views were quite contrarian. But Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose always regarded Gandhi as his mentor, and he is known to have said that, Gandhi and my father were not tainted. So he had immense respect for Gandhi, and so did Gandhi, right? But in the Haripura Congress session, and this is a purely philatelic cover in the Haripura session. During the Congress session in 1938, there was a rift because Gandhi was purely nonviolent, like he advocated for nonviolent struggle, and Subhash Bose, he did not agree to that point of view by that time, right? He was using the precedents during World War I as well, where Indians fought for the British, but nothing came out. Nothing came about, the Dominion status that never came about, and things like that. So this is where Netaji and Mahatma Gandhi, they kind of split, right? And what happened was, like the British, they knew how popular Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was, and they sort of kept him, not sort of, they arrested Netaji because he had tremendous uh, power to mobilize masses, and we will see some examples of that later. Uh, and he was arrested by the British, and then what happened was, during 1941, he fled the British, like he escaped from his Calcutta home, and he went all the way to Germany, right? He wanted to leverage the growing British, the animosity towards the British by the Axis powers, to leverage India's independence, right? And he, of course, this is a very controversial picture, right? Today, like the Germans can go about freely by acknowledging their Nazi past. Somehow Indians have not risen to that, but Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did indeed meet Hitler, and only under the pretext of the fact that, enemy of an enemy is a friend. And to sort of substantiate that, this statement, there is a known anecdote between Netaji and Hitler. So Hitler said that, what if we keep you under constant watch, right? And Netaji valiantly replied that, hey, I fled the British surveillance. Do you think I cannot flee the German surveillance? I mean, that's sort of the paraphrase of it all. But that is who Netaji was, during this time. So what did Netaji really do, right? So he really tried to mobilize the Indian prisoners of war that were being captured in Germany, right? And they were being stationed in Stalag. There are various camps out there, and this is a Red Cross postcard. Not a Red Cross postcard, but a postcard from an Indian prisoner of war who sent back his letter to Calcutta, right? So Netaji sort of mobilized a lot of these Indian prisoners of war to form an Indian government and an army. And he had a lot of vision as to what he really wanted to do for India's independence, and mobilize the masses, form an army, and really attack the British, sort of piggybacking on Axis attack towards the British in India, right? And of course, he wanted to form a legitimate government. He had issued these famous Azad Hind stamps, right? I mean, these are very well known. And as you can see, right, I mean, just from the design of the stamps, you can see that he had a vision for a sustainable government. He was talking about military, agriculture, and charkha, right, which was the symbol of the Gandhi or the Congress for that matter. He used that design in his own government, right? He had all of that, of course, healthcare and the three soldiers, or the INA soldiers, these 1 rupee plus 2 rupee stamps as well, right? There was also several of these covers known, which are written from Field Post Nume or Field Post number 10105C, where Indian Legion was stationed. So I thought that it would be a lot of fun to use some of these covers to include or highlight Netaji's attempts in Germany. However, all of this, despite all of this, rather, Indian independence was not really in one of the primary agenda of the Germans during that time, right? So what happens next? On the other hand, in the Far East, right, there had been this concept of this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. And this is propaganda material, nothing to do with postal history, by the Japanese, where we see that this like Asia for Asian sort of a situation. And of course, Indian independence is one of the primary prerogatives to have such a co-prosperity sphere. And if you can see over here where my mouse is pointing, it's the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, on which an INA soldier, and he's holding the flag of India, again with the charkha or the Congress flag, right? So this is why in the East Asia or in the Far East, the concept of Indian independence was more of a necessity. And there was also, as I'm going to be talking about in a bit, there was also the resources to form this sort of a struggle, or the plan, or the vision that Netaji had. The resources to execute such plan was available in the Far East, right? And the question is how, right? And to do that, during the like late 1940s, right? In the Far East, what happened was Indian field post offices were being stationed, and there are a lot of Indian troops were out there to defend Singapore, right? The Singapore and the other strait settlements that the British had, and they were sent in Malaya and other regions to defend British interests in that region, right? And this is a letter on active service sent from FPO number 32 in the June of 1941, where Indians were Indian soldiers were sort of defending that, and it's written to the 10x2 Punjab regiment from 5x2 Punjab regiment that was stationed in Singapore. And the only way to get these dates or the locations of these things is you have to like go to Colonel D.S. Work's book, where he lists the FPOs and their respective locations during these dates, right? So that's what sort of tells me that this was stationed in that region, although base postal depot Bombay was written here. Now, December 1941, Singapore falls, right? All postal communications were seized in the area. And as you can see, letters that were sent from India to Singapore, or at least tried to be sent to Singapore, they were returned, right? It says service to destination suspended, return to sender. And this is only because Singapore had fallen, and British and the Japanese slowly they occupied the whole of the Malayan Peninsula and all of that, right? Now, I would say that Japanese occupation of Malaya right, was a step closer to the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. This is a purely commemorative cover. I do not have it in my exhibit yet, but as you can see, right, it's a commemorative cover with the first, like celebrating the first year of the fall of Singapore. And on that, you would see this red catchet on the extreme right. You see again the Congress flag, right? So I don't know. It kind of baffles me, of course, that India, Netaji and Gandhi, they were at odds in their views. But Netaji typically used the symbols that really described a struggle for independence that were derived from the Congress, right? So I would not really go to the extent and say that they were fighting against each other. There's this myth that it was Gandhi and Nehru who is the, you know, the bigger person of all. They were all the same to me, right? Now, in the occupied areas, right, a couple of things that needed to be established before I can talk about the Indian independence leagues and all of that. And that's purely postal history. So as you can see, right, sender's name and address had to be shown on the cover, right? You cannot send mails or even postcards for that matter where your name and address are not written. Also, even if your name is written, right, your address have to be correct before this mail can be transmitted through them. I mean, they were censored, as you can see, but they just could not be sent or transmitted just because the sender's name or details were not written, right? So that's one of the postal history housekeeping, if you will, that I have included in my exhibit. Now coming to some of the prized possessions in my collection, these Indian Independence League or Indian Independence Volunteer Force hand stamps, right? So these were, as you can see, these were written by by Indian Independence Volunteer Forces. And these are the forces or the Indian, like the Indian communities that were existing in these in this peninsula, in the Malayan Peninsula. Rash Bihari Bose, he organized them to form these volunteer forces. And what he really did was he was training them with military training and all of that, such that they could participate in a war in case it broke out, right? So this is one of the letters which was sent by an volunteer, sent from Kuala Lumpur to Alor Star and then Kedah, right? Kulim, Kedah, that's where it was sent to, right? I have another cover which was sent from Cebu to Sarike, right? It was in the other island, right, of Malaysia. Again, this was censored, and it was like the postal rate was 8 sen as well. Now, one of the very important things that you would note in this cover is that the sender's name is not listed here, right? It just has this Indian Independence League hand stamp. And by virtue of that, this mail was transmitted, right? So it kind of tells me that there was like these Indian Independence Leagues, they had some sort of privilege with the Japanese that would enable them to communicate with each other without explicitly writing from whom these letters were being sent to. Now, a couple of things I want to sort of highlight, right? There has been questions that whether such letters were possible to be sent from, Japanese occupied Malaya to India, and the answer is a big no. The reason being the fact that the British censorship was quite very strong, and if they would have seen such, Indian Independence League's hand stamp, they would immediately destroy such letters, right? Not only that, these letters are very difficult to even obtain because of the fact that after independence, right, this like this these independence leagues rather, They did not want to have any sort of association because during that time we were talking about the Nuremberg trials and things like that, Nazis and all of that. So nobody wanted to sort of harbor any association with them. And that's the reason, these letters are very difficult to see. This is another form, right? Which was, again, this was form for sending messages. This is something that I procured very recently, not in my exhibit yet. But this is, again, like a form where you would just send messages from from a volunteer to his or her family. And it had to be endorsed by the Indian Independence League in Ipoh. Now, moving forward, what happened, right? We talked about Netaji's vision earlier during World War II in Germany. And then Raj Bihari Bose, he had developed these various Indian independence leagues in the Malayan Peninsula. But there was not, in the Malayan Peninsula, there was not a proper vision as to what are you going to do with these different armies, right? I mean, with these different volunteer leagues, what would you do with them, right? What are they going to be fighting for, right? So then Raj Bihari Bose, he was getting very old during that time. And Netaji, travels all the way from Kiel to Japan by the U-boat submarine. And I'm not going to talk about that. It's a big story all by itself. And he arrives in Japan, and Raj Bihari Bose hands over the Indian independence or the volunteer leagues over to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, right? And Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had this very effective gentleman, Captain Mohan Singh of the Indian National Army. Now, he was the key negotiator with the Japanese to form these Indian national armies, which would fight alongside the Japanese during the Burmese campaign that would soon follow, right? Post-independent India, of course, commemorated the INA through stamps. In 1993, it was the golden jubilee of the INA because they were formed in October of 1943 to be exact. And of course, in the Netaji Subhash Bose centenary, 67, not centenary, 67th birth anniversary in 1964, the design in the behind shows INA soldiers. And again, Netaji's head is sort of, you can almost see the small wheel of the charkha in this flag as well. Now, moving forward, you formed the Indian National Army and or the Azad Hind Fauj for that matter. And this is an extremely interesting cover that I discovered in a collection where it bore the words Jai Hind, right, at the very top of the cover, right? Now, this cover, I would call it triple censored, right? First of all, let's take a step back. Like, why is this cover a rarity in Japanese occupation philately in general? It's because of the fact that the usage of these Thai stamps are very rare on cover. The reason being, when Japan occupied Thailand, right, they made a treaty with the Thai saying that, okay, I give you back your territories. You can govern your own territories, but you have to be sort of adhering to certain rules and laws of us, right? You have to help us with our war efforts and all of that. And a part of that was that you could only buy stamps using Japanese currency, right? Now, Japanese currency to Thai was not a popular thing, so that's why usages of these stamps on cover are very rare. That's number one. Number two is, you have this Jai Hind written at the very top, right? I mean, of course, Jai Hind means glory to India, right? Paraphrasing it. And it is being written by a soldier, I would call him a soldier, of the 1/7 GRLA, which is basically short form for Guerrilla Regiment, or EGT for Regiment, AHF or Azad Hind Fauj in Jitira. Jitira is somewhere around here. No, sorry, Jitira is somewhere around here, near around this region. And this is where this cover was sent from, in like Camp Jitira. Someone with who has done some little study on the INA. This is where the Indian soldiers were, or the members of the volunteer forces who eventually became a part of the INA. They were being trained. And this is one of my prized possessions. And as you can see on the reverse, it is censored by Sikh, Nani Singh. And this is his censored chop that was used to censor these letters. Now, moving forward, right, you form the Azad Hind government, or the government had an army, right, an Indian National Army. And now, how do you legitimate or rather legitimize that government, right, in international law? So to do that, what the Japanese did was they handed over, right, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands over to Netaji Subhash Bose and the INA. And this, he's looking at the cellular jail, right, which was used as a British penitentiary. And Netaji, they took over the islands, and to sort of highlight that, I used again a stamp. It is completely discouraged to be used per FIP rules in a philatelic exhibit unless you can justify it. I mean, there are postal histories that are known to bear these stamps, but there's a debate as to whether they're philatelic or commercially used. So I'm not going to get into that. I just wanted to highlight that event using this stamp, which has this 0.20 sen overprinted on Indian service stamp, right? And these are extremely scarce to get. And even if you get them, 9 out of 10 chances are they are crude forgeries. So don't buy them without good provenance, right? And they are very expensive materials. So don't buy them without provenance would be I cannot reiterate that enough, right? Also, during the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, several Japanese troops were posted, right? And to highlight that, I used 2 military postcards. One was sent from Sasiba Post Office I-11, which indicated Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And the other one was from I-30 from the Nankori, somewhere around this region in the Nicobar Islands, right? And the way to sort of understand these postcards, right, are 2 things, right? So first of all of them bear this censored chops, right? And these are personal or private chops of the person who was censoring these postcards, right? And the only way you can understand where this was sent from is you have to decrypt this Japanese text. If you know Japanese, good for you. If you don't, you have like myself, you have to really pay a Japanese translator to read what these addresses are. And that's how you get to know that they were from that. I mean, unless of course, they were being sold to you as what they are. Luckily for me, it was that case, but I happened to cross-check it before putting it in my exhibit anyways, and they definitely are from where they claim to be. Now, moving forward, this is the map, right? If I have to look at the bigger picture. So by December 1943, we had the Azad Hind government. We had legitimate Azad Hind government, if you will, right? I mean, of course, this is this was taken from a website where it's written as JAPPUP, which means Japanese puppet government. I won't get into attributions there. But if you look at the map here, right, how would the Japanese, for the lack of a better word, occupy or invade India, right? So they have to go through Burma, right? So Burma played a very important role in the Japanese attempt to occupy India, if you will, right? And to do that, I took a little bit detour into the Burmese history, right? So Burma really came under British rule after the Third Anglo-Burmese War. So this is a double rate, subfield PO1 cover. They are extremely rare. And what happened was in somewhere in the 1935, I don't exactly recall the year, uh, Burma was declared an independent, dominion under the British, right? And what happened was, even after that, a lot of these Indians were employed in Burma by the British, right? And they were uh, replacing the native Bamar people. And they were extremely angry. The native Bamar people were extremely angry about this. And they really wanted to sort of uh, try few things with the British, right, to sort of negotiate their own independence with the British. And the Netaji, not, I wouldn't say Netaji, when the Japanese were really trying to occupy India through Burma, right, they found a way. Okay, so now we have options, right? Now we can leverage, the Japanese to sort of help us negotiate our own demands with the British, right? And that's how the Burmese people sort of came into this whole picture. Nonetheless, the Japanese did occupy Burma, right? And this is a postcard in which, these are very well known postcards where, where the face of King George VI was defaced, and they were seized and they were imprinted with heavy cross and crest of the Burma state government. Of course, they were censored, and this is, I use this to sort of highlight the Japanese invasion of Burma. So now, to sort of support the war efforts, this was a very mountainous terrain, right? And that's why what the Japanese had to do, they had to create sort of a communication route from plains in Thailand all the way, to Molme and all these places, such that they could help in the war effort against their invasion into India, right? And to do that, what they employed was, it's called the Thai Burma, it's the death railway. It's still, I mean, you can Google today, it's still well known. And this is a postcard that was written by a soldier who was a part of this regiment that was employed to work on the death railway. And a lot of prisoners of war died as this railway lines were formed, right? Now coming to the Imphal campaign, and this is forming the climax of this entire story, right? So you have Japanese soldiers, right? You negotiated that the Indian National Army was formed. You have Indians, prisoners of war or Indian volunteers who are now into and a well-knit unit called the Indian National Army, and they had to fight with the Japanese in this battle of Imphal, right? And this battle of Imphal really is one of the key events in this entire story, right? And what the INA did was they formed these very crude stamps which bore the words Chalo Delhi. This is a 1 paise and this is 1 anna stamp, and as you can see, it's provisional government of free India. Very crude stamps, very like a lot of forgeries that are available. And at the same time, if you can see over here, right, this is a wall of the Red Fort. Again, a symbolism that is derived from the mutiny or the revolt of 1857, right? So the mutiny or the revolt of 1857 sort of comes back again and again, and we will see another example where this sort of comes back. And that's the reason why I sort of started my exhibit with an item from that period, right? Now, in this Imphal campaign, of course, it was a very well knit, I mean, well planned campaign by the Japanese, and the Japanese had initial victory in this campaign. And one of the very first things that really happened as a result of this campaign was the fact that an Indian flag was hoisted on the Indian soil for the first time prior to 1947, or the independence of India, right? And the other thing I wanted to highlight with these stamps was that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he thought that when the Indians would fight in India, right, on the Indian soil per se, there would be a tremendous psychological impact among the Indian masses that would enrage the entire population to fight against British imperialism. And that's the reason why he had these stamps designed, right? Now, moving forward with the Imphal campaign, another example where the revolt of 1857, or the mutiny, sort of crops up in this story is, as you can see, this is a postcard that was written from a female volunteer of the Rani of Jhansi camp in Sionan. Sionan is nothing but Singapore. And the reverse of the letter has the two words Jai Hind in Devanagari, right? And the content of this postcard is probably one of the most chilling items that I've ever seen in Indian, I wouldn't call it Indian postal history, but this is probably one of my most favorite items. This volunteer, she is writing to her family, stating that she's just being called for the Imphal campaign. And she says that the long-awaited opportunity has come. This evening, we, the first batch of volunteers, are leaving for Burma. It may be some time before you hear from me again, but rest assured that I shall always be safe and sound wherever I am. Pray for your child. Give my love and best wishes to my brothers and sisters and friends. Time is short and I can't think of anything else. I will try to write, right? So this is one of the things that I want to highlight with this particular artifact, is that there's a high possibility that this lady, F. Janaki Bai, she never visited India, right? She might have come from, I mean, her parents might have come from India, and she was born in Malaya. But, thanks to the organizational abilities of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, that an entire, this sentiment or anti-British sentiment to fight for Indian independence was sort of instilled on someone who probably never visited India before, right? And this is one of the most, important revelations that I had when I was collecting this topic. Now, these are a couple of postcards or military postcards that I use to show the units that the INA fought with, like of the Japanese units that the INA fought with. And one of them is the 31st Division, and the other one was the 33rd Division. Again, I had to decrypt the Japanese script over here to professionals. And these were written during the Imphal campaign, and that's why they form a part of my exhibit out here. Now, again, as I said, right, these are, there were initial victory by the Japanese. And this is basically a telegram that was sent by an English soldier, right? Because, it was sent from Milestone 83 in Tidim. And, again, this is something where I have to tell you that you have to believe me because I'm still researching on that. And I really got this from successor of, of Taylor himself, right? So that's how I know that it is something that fits into my story. But then I have to have more philatelic evidence or documentation around that as well. Now, how did the Allied troops respond, right? So one thing we have to remember is that, before the invasion of Burma, right, no railroad or, links sort of existed in the India and the Burma frontier, right? Uh, Although, as I said, like initially the Japanese were winning the war, but what the British were really, really effective was to reorganize their postal systems of the line of communications, right? And they would be using these line of communication, or they would convert their base post offices, right, into this line of communications where they would airdrop resources, and they would be able to sustain the war against the Japanese, right? And it was a very, very tough war. I mean, if you read more and more about it, you'll come to learn that, how difficult it was for the British to fend off the Japanese in this Imphal campaign. This is another letter which was sent from FPO 120 serving Manipur Road during the Battle of Imphal. So this was written at the height of the Battle of Imphal, and I thought it would be a pertaining item for my exhibit. And the last item was, this FPO 122, which served, a fair weather airfield in Wangjing, Manipur, which sort of helped the British get relief in the Imphal campaign, defeat the Japanese and help the British get relief in the Imphal campaign. And as I said earlier, right, this Imphal campaign was one of the major campaigns that the British had to fend off, and it was not a trivial campaign. And we see some evidence of that from these rocket mails that were, I wouldn't call them rocket mails, these were rocket experiments that were done by Stephen Smith, right? They were initially planned earlier, but Stephen Smith did not get the permissions, and that's why he later sort of commemorated the Allied victory in Dimapur and Kohima, with these rocket mails. And on the reverse of both of these, it's written that a dreamer's humble effort to immortalize those who gave their lives to save us from inhuman Jap atrocities, right? Now, moving forward, the fate of the INA after the defeat, right? So what happened to the INA after that? So of course, British media, they sort of denigrated the Indian National Army in world politics, right? Netaji, he wouldn't give up. He was exploring support of the Soviet Union for India's sovereignty. But Netaji's mysterious disappearance in August and Japan's surrender in September 1945 sort of sealed the fate for the movement. But the sacrifice and the bravery of INA troops inspired future mutinies that we'll talk about, and adversely impacted public sentiment against British rule in India that precipitated Indian independence in 15th of August, right? So this is one of the covers that was sent from the chairman of the Indian Independence League in Rangoon from the IIL headquarters, sent to the chairman of the Independence League. And, he was, the chairman was none other than S.A. Iyer, who retreated out of Burma with Subhash Bose and about 200 members of Azad Hind cabinet after Japanese surrender. This is again another cover where it was sent from Singapore to Bukit Martajam in Malaya, again with the 8 sen rate, right? And it was addressed to the propaganda division of the Indian Independence League after the defeat of the INA. So it's probably one of the only discovered covers of Indian Independence League in the post-relief period. Now, towards the last bit, right, what was the impact of INA in India? And this is something that I have not included in my exhibit as of today, but I plan to do it in my next iteration. So the first thing are the Royal Indian Navy mutinies, right? Like what Netaji envisioned earlier, that the spirit of nationalism would be a major thing once the people would learn about the sacrifice of the INA, right? So they were the Royal Indian Navy. They sort of mutinied against the British because of their poor conditions as soldiers, right? They were postal, like Indian strike by Indian postal workers. Again, this cover can be regarded as philatelic. We don't know what it is. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be using it in my next iteration or not, or if I have to use it, I have to use it in a more prudent way to highlight this, these Indian strikes. The other thing that I recently procured, believe it or not, from eBay, was this RAF post letter, right? Where this was written by a soldier, and he writes, "I was not given much time to think it over." Basically, he was being asked to uh, uh, terminate his services. And he's saying that having to sign then and there, but Group 40 releases seem to be as far away as ever. And another summer in India would definitely be ungood for me, especially if I had to remain in this region. Same sections of this unit are only moving as far as Dum Dum when the station closes down. Moreover, there is definitely trouble brewing, and a live dog is better than a dead lion, right? So, a British soldier is actually, writing of the contemporaneous times, that existed during the end of November, right? 1945, after everything, after Indians or the Indian masses really came to know about the sacrifices of the INA, right? So this I found a very interesting item. I still have to think as to how I'm going to put it in my exhibit, postal history exhibit, if you will, and thought of sharing that with you guys. And lastly, I conclude with a cover that I procured some 20 years ago. It's my father who helped me procure this cover. As I said, right, the words Jai Hind, which we saw in covers that were, or sorry, in letters or correspondences that were used by the volunteers or the soldiers of the Indian National Army earlier. We see the same words in the first philatelic item of Free India, the words Jai Hind. And I want to conclude my presentation with that and let you be the judge as to what really precipitated India's independence. Now, one thing I wanted to just quickly touch upon was my performance at two different exhibits. So one was an FIP show, CAPEX showed this exhibit, and I showed a similar version in San Diego show. And this is how it fared. And one of the, like a few of the comments that I received from the jury was mostly around, as you can see, right? I think treatment is where I lost most of the points, right? Condition and rarity, I fairly did well. In FIP, I did fairly well, in rarity in the WSP show as well. Personal study and research, so okay, like I scored pretty high on that on the FIP show as well. But I think the treatment is where I lost most of the points. And one of the reasons was that the jury could not really see as to how I was tying up classic Indian material, 1857 material, with the story that I was telling here, which is, typically happening in the late 1930s and early 1940s, right? So how do we tie that up? Any suggestions from you all would be helpful. And with that, I just wanted to have a slide for acknowledgement. So I I recently lost my mother-in-law, so this presentation is in memory of her. I would like to thank Colin, Dan, Pat Walker, Ken for extremely critical feedback during jury sessions. Colin, like he literally gave me some extremely critical comments that would help me develop the next iteration of this exhibit. Markand, he's a well-known exhibitor in rocket mails, so he drew my attention to the rocket mails that I showed. Jyotirmay, he has an excellent collection of propaganda materials that I'm not, he shared all his images and it's a whole new different story. If I ever plan to display this in the open class or the display class at all. Raj Rajan, of course, he shared his exhibiting techniques with me, and he also had some materials on the INA that I had never seen that helped me do some survey in my when I was communicating this to the jury. And my several philatelic friends who helped me procure materials, encouraged me, gave me critical feedback, like Subhanku, Samik, Anurag, Ramu, David, and Mike. Pretty much a lot of my Malayan and Far East materials came from them. So thank you, everyone, and open for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Apratim. I think one of the important points that Apratim has sort of raised with us is, when is an exhibit a theme or a topic versus postal history? And I think that's one of the areas that both you and Raj have struggled with. Raj talked about it yesterday, and sometimes we think of an exhibit as being one classification, whereas a jury will often look at it as a different classification. And I think that's one of the areas that you may struggle with as Raj has struggled with. Now, turning it over to questions, Ravi has a question. He has his hand raised. So Ravi, if you want to unmute yourself and pose your question.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to really compliment Apratim for outstanding research in developing a very, shall we say, instructive and informative story and presentation, very comprehensive, which creates its own challenges. But I just want to focus on a couple of points. So I think one of the things that as a general information for some of the participants here, an excellent series was shown, I think Netflix, was called Forgotten Army. And if any of you have more interest, that serial shows amazingly in detail formation of the INA and its relationship with the Japanese military, and all the way up to Imphal and the role valiant campaign that the INA did while the Japanese were retreating. So it's just a very interesting companion to this presentation. The two other points I want to make is that actually the relationship between the Ottoman Empire and particularly the Hyderabad emperor has not been widely recognized or studied. You showed a very interesting item from the World War I, which led me to remember that I have seen a cover from Turkey to a Turkish military officer assigned to Hyderabad in the 1860s. So maybe that's another field of research that may be worthwhile. But this is very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. Do we have any other questions for Apratim? Oh, we have a question from the room. Do you want to come forward, and hopefully everybody can hear?
Hello. Hopefully this is what you based the question.
So I can't hear anything, Colin, if you can just repeat.
Oh, okay, Apratim, let me try. I've unmuted myself, so
Mhm.
hopefully you can hear me. The question from the person in the room was, you showed the two labels showing the wall. There were the two, or I think red and I forget the other color. And the question was the connection between those labels and the 1857 mutiny,
Yeah.
in quotes.
Fair enough. Yeah. Sorry, I should have explained that. So the 1857 mutiny, or one of the key, I would say, I wouldn't call it a campaign per se, one of the key events of the 1857 mutiny was the like the declaration of Bahadur Shah Zafar as the Indian emperor, right? And the symbolism of the Indian empire per se, I would call it. In the 1857, I don't have the right word for it, but that was basically the Delhi, or the Red Fort, right? It formed as the fortification of Indian empire, or native Indian empire per se. And that stamp showed I would call it stamps, you can call it labels, but they really showed the walls of the Red Fort, which is nothing but a symbol of that empire, United Empire, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, Apratim, Raj has a question also from the.
Enjoyed the talk, Apratim, but I will also add another historical context of the Red Fort that was in the Chalo Delhi labels, was that the trials of the Indian National Army gave the soldiers who had quote unquote defected from the British Indian Army to the INA were also referred to as the Red Fort trials, because that's where they were held.
Of course. Yeah. You're right. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Apratim, we have another question from the room. So
Sure.
today's you've created more questions than we had yesterday.
Well, I have a comment to make. I would give a shout out again to the series on Amazon Prime, The Forgotten Army. It's a very interesting accounting of the INA involvement in Malaya and Burma. Quite well done. And the other thing, I wonder if you would comment on how Chandra Bose returned to the greater East Asia prosperity sphere from Nazi Germany. I think it's quite an interesting story. I don't know if you mentioned it, about how he returned to Asia from Nazi Germany, where he was trying to raise Indian troops who had been captured by the Nazis in North Africa.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful story, and all I know is that it was he traveled through the German U-boat, right? The German submarines, and I think I show it a little bit in a part of my presentation. I'm not sure if you guys can see my screen, but I'm just going to reshare. Just a second here. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is the, where is it? Yeah. So this is the map, if I may zoom in a little bit. So this is the map of Netaji's Great Escape, right? So he moved all the way from Calcutta, used disguises. He reached Berlin, met with Hitler. Then he went to Kiel, where he took the U-boat from. And this is his path all the way, right? And mind you, this is, well into the British territory, surviving several bombing and everything by the British, and that's how he reached this Penang, and from there he moved all the way to Tokyo. Yeah, I mean it's quite a interesting story, and as I said, it's a story by itself. To tying up with, I think, from a philatelic perspective, There might be some, I mean, I know that there are U-boat mails that exist in German philately, but I haven't really able to find something that sort of ties up that specific U-boat with in which Netaji traveled to philately per se. But yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic story to tell.
Yeah, I would add to your accounting. I'm a French colonies collector, and at that period, Madagascar was under the control of the Vichy French, who were collaborating with the Nazis. And the actual, what I read, I think is a Wikipedia, was that the German U-boat dropped Bose off in Madagascar at a port, and then he was picked up by a Japanese U-boat, and then moved from there to the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, as the Japanese called it.
Yeah. It's a fantastic story.
Yeah, Pratim, hello.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, Pratim, the presentation was excellent. It was a Pratim presentation, I would say. Just my question. So, any idea how much time Bose took from Europe to reach Japan?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have it at the top of my head. I won't just quote
Okay.
your number and be quoted for
Just,
being wrong about.
because yeah, he came all the way to Africa to Japan. So I was just curious how much time it might have taken.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't have it at the top of my head.
It's okay. Yeah.